right, good morning, God bless. So my buddy sent me this video. Said there's some wild abortion claims from a quote unquote Christian in it. So I haven't seen it yet. Let's take a listen and see. I don't know who this guy is, some kind of Democrat politician. So let's see what he has to say.
Right? Like I was told that if you wanted to be a Christian, you had to hate gay people. If you wanted to be a Christian, you had to want to control women. If you wanted to be a Christian, you had to reject science. And so when Gen Z and when millennials were faced with that choice, it was a pretty easy choice for them, right? They chose their gay friends. They chose women's rights. They chose believing in science.
Who was telling you that, bro? Christians were telling you that? No, they weren't. Secular people were telling you that.
And that, in my opinion, was always a false choice. And in fact, a lot of those positions that I just mentioned are contrary to biblical values, to the teachings of Jesus. And so, there's always going to be progressive Christians and conservative Christians. That's a very healthy debate we should always have. But in this country, it's become synonymous with right-wing politics. So much so that when people hear I'm a Christian politician, they just assume I'm a Republican. So it's just, I think that has pushed a lot of people away. So if we're looking at the last 40, 50 years, the religious right has made a concerted effort to make homosexuality and abortion the two biggest issues for Christians. And, the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-choice until the late 1970s. So this idea that to be a Christian means you have to be anti-gay and anti-abortion.
Okay. So right away, he says the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-choice before the 70s. I mean, look, I spent a couple of years in a Southern Baptist church when I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I had a buddy down there who was ardently opposed to abortion. So this topic came up a couple times, and he is misrepresenting that. That is not a true statement. There was a period of time where the Southern Baptists, they softened on abortion, and they were like willing to make exceptions in the case of like rape and incest and all that. In fact, here, let's just. I'm willing to bet this is gonna back up what I said. Yep. Southern Baptist Convention held a conditionally pro-choice stance in the early 70s before shifting to a firmly pro-life position in the 80s. So he's misrepresenting this. He's making the case that they were like completely pro-choice. That's just a false statement. They were conditionally, and it only lasted about 10 years. And it was only in the cases of rape, incest, and fetal deformity and mother's life was at risk here. In the 80s, if I remember correctly, shift to pro-life. In the 80s, they went to a strongly pro-life resolution. So, and what authority are we given to the Southern Baptist Convention anyway? Like, the Catholic Church has been anti-abortion forever. So I don't know why we're using the Southern Baptist Convention as our litmus test for morality on abortion. But okay, so he's off to a bad start here.
There really is no historical, theological, biblical basis for that opinion.
Well, when was abortion even invented?
Hold on.
Well, there were certainly abortions in the...
No historical? He just made the case. There is no historical precedent for being anti-abortion. That's nonsense. The Didache from hold on, be right back. This is the Didache. This is a 1st century AD. It's a sort of handbook for the Christian church, written probably before 100 AD. So it was even in consideration to be part of the canon of the Bible. And in chapter 2, it says very clearly, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not corrupt youth, thou shalt not commit fornication, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not use soothsaying, thou shalt not practice sorcery, Thou shalt not kill a child by abortion, nor shalt thou slay it when born. So it even makes a distinction between a child in the womb and a child outside of the womb. To say that there's no historical precedent is absurd. From the very beginning, the Christian church was anti-abortion. And like, even to the point where the church was considered a religion of women and slaves and children, because Christians were going out and rescuing abandoned children and freeing slaves. Like, it was a religion of a life, of saving lives. This guy claimed he has gone to seminary, and he's made two absurdly false statements already.
Ancient world, there's some, and again, I haven't studied this enough to say this definitively, but there are interpretations of certain passages from the Torah where some folks will even say that there is some subtle instructions for how to perform an abortion in the ancient world, certain things to drink, things like that. The point is that this idea that, on the issue of abortion, is just not rooted in Scripture. We can have an honest debate about it. If Pope Francis, were to come back and sit at this table and tell me, James, I'm pro-life and anti-abortion, here's my theological argument, I am here to listen and respect that opinion. I have dear friends who are anti-abortion. All I'm asking is that for Christians who are pro-choice and who respect the bodily autonomy of women, that we be given the space to make our theological argument, because I think there is a lot of biblical evidence to support that opinion.
What do you think is the biblical evidence to support the opinion of being pro-abortion?
So, one,
question,
in Genesis, God creates life by breathing life into the first human being, which we later call Adam. That life starts when you take your first breath, and that is actually the mainline position in Judaism, is that that's when life starts. Then, if you think about it from a Christian perspective, something interesting that Jesus does throughout his ministry is he is breaking first century norms about women, talking with women, learning from women, having women lieutenants in his movement. And this was something that was kind of unheard of in the first century. The longest conversation Jesus has with anybody in the whole Bible is with the Samaritan woman at the well. And so this affirmation of women as full and equal people is a huge part of the Jesus movement, especially the early church. And then the last, I think, story I would go to is the story of Mary. Mary is probably my favorite figure in the Bible, the mother of Jesus.
What argument was he just trying to make there? Because women were important in Jesus' ministry, somehow that supports the bodily autonomy argument? That doesn't track at all.
And, she's an oppressed peasant teenage girl living in poverty under an oppressive empire as a Jew. And she has a vision from God that she's going to give birth to a baby who's going to bring the powerful down from their thrones, going to scatter the proud, who's going to send the rich away empty. I mean, this revolutionary song that she sings, it's called the Magnificat. And it's actually been banned by certain authoritarian regimes because it is so radical. But I say all this in context of abortion, because before God comes over Mary and we have the incarnation, God asks for Mary's consent, which is remarkable. I mean, go back and read this in Luke.
What?
I mean,
no, he does not.
The angel comes down and asks Mary if this is something she wants to do. And she says, if it is God's will, let it be done. Let it be. Let it happen. So to me, that is an affirmation in one of our most...
This is an utterly false claim. Luke chapter 1. I'm going to use his reference. We can read it. There is no point in time where God asked if Mary consents to be the mother of Jesus. Yeah, birth of Jesus. In the 6 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greeting, Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you. Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. These are commands, not requests. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. How will this be? Mary asked the angel, since I am a virgin. The angel answered, The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who is said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be filled. Then the angel left her. Using your references, man. There is no point in there at any time when he asks her, would you like to be the mother of God? Would you be willing to do this? No, he told her. It's just, this guy says he went to seminary? Come on, man.
Central stories that creation has to be done with consent.
What?
You cannot force someone to create. Creation is one of the most sacred acts that we engage in as human beings, but that has to be done with consent. It has to be done with freedom, and to me, that is absolutely consistent with the ministry and life and death of Jesus. And so that's how I come down on that side of the issue. Again, I'm very open for my fellow Christians to disagree with that, and they may have scriptural passages they point to be anti-abortion.
The creation of human life absolutely should be done with consent. I don't think there's any Christian on earth who would argue that it shouldn't be. That it is absolutely a sin to force, grape somebody and force creation. Like, nobody would argue that point. So what you're talking about is not a position of morality. Like, we agree that it's morally wrong to do that.
And I think that's a debate that we should feel comfortable having. All I'm saying is that it shouldn't be assumed that just because you're a Christian, you are anti-gay or anti-abortion, because there are so many Christians out there who don't subscribe to either of those policy positions.
So there's a lot of nuance if you're talking about abortion, right? Because you're not just talking about a woman's right to choose, but you're also talking about rape and incest.
That's right.
Right. So you're talking about a woman's right to choose whether or not she carries a baby when it was not her choice to begin with.
That's right. And it's why I think that almost everyone in this country is pro-choice to some extent, because the polling indicates that the vast majority of Texans, the vast majority of Americans support exceptions for rape, incest, or threats to the mother's health.
Yeah.
Now,
I've had arguments with people that don't support that, though, which is interesting. They say the argument that they give is that two wrongs don't make a right. And, it's a crazy argument because they're even talking about it with underage girls.
But at least they're...
So I don't disagree. Probably most Americans do think that there should be exceptions to it. Like, that's probably true. But he's arguing it like the point is, like, because a majority of people believe this, it is a greater moral position, or but that's a logical fallacy. Just because a majority of people believe something does not necessarily make it morally correct. Yeah, so this is the logical fallacy. The logical fallacy claims a majority of opinion makes something morally correct is called the argument of populum. I couldn't remember that word, populum. Latin for appeal to the people, or the bandwagon fallacy. Fallacy assumes that because many people believe something is true or morally right, it must be so. So just because a majority of people believe that does not make it the morally correct position, and certainly doesn't make it the position that God would believe.
Consistent. Again,
Yeah.
if you believe that a fetus is a person, now,
Well, it certainly has the
fe-
potential to be a
Yes.
person, right?
well, and a fetus is alive, in terms of just biologically alive.
Yeah.
But we do have literally trillions of living organisms in us right now. The
But they
question
don't
is,
have the potential to be a full-grown human being.
absolutely. But the question is a fetus or is an embryo a person with full legal rights?
Yes. So the answer is yes. And the reason the answer is yes is because what is the most basic element of being a human? It's your genetic code, right? Your DNA. It defines everything about your physical process from conception, growth, old age, what your hair color is, what your eye color is, your sex, everything. So that is the basic fundamental building block of being a human being. So the genetic code is created within seconds after conception. And you then go through the process of, growth all the way to death as a human with that same genetic code. So you are a life, like right away at conception. And the argument that he's making here is like an interesting one. He's like, well, are you really a person, or are you just like sort of like maybe possibly could be a person? Well, it's interestingly, that's the same kind of argument they used for slavery when they were like, well, slaves, are they really people? They're not really people. We'll give them 2/3. We'll say they're 2/3 of a people. It's the same kind of argument. You're a person, but not really a person, like not yet. So you don't deserve rights. You don't deserve life. Even our Constitution says you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, in the Constitution, a slave back then wasn't a full person who didn't have full rights. They're making that same exact argument. It's crazy.
Rights that trump the rights of a woman, or a girl, as you mentioned, because if you're a 16-year-old girl who's been raped, does that embryo or that fetus, does its rights trump the rights of that girl?
Right.
Or the life? And I say no. I think most Americans say no. And to me, that exposes kind of the lack of support for fetal personhood. Again, we can have conversations about limits to abortion, all of those things. But I do think it's clear that most Americans believe that a woman or a girl should have the autonomy to make those decisions about their own body.
I think most Americans probably would agree with that, but I think also most Americans are very uncomfortable with the concept of late-term abortions.
Sure, yeah. And I would say...
What are your thoughts on late-term abortions?
Well, I think if you look at the data, the late-term abortions that happen are almost exclusively to save the life of the mother. Because, now you're talking about people who have picked out a name, who have bought a crib, people who want this baby. And so the only time this happens is for immediate.
I don't think this is true.
Life.
I don't think this is true. I think this is not a true statement. Let's find out. Oops. So how many, first of all, are performed annually in the U.S.? I think it's about 1% of abortions. Okay, yeah, here we go. So the CDC prevention reported that 1% of abortions, so approximately 6,700 abortions, are late-term abortions. So out of 600,000, 6,700 are late-term abortions. How many of those were solely performed to save mother's life? So let's see, where is it? Reasons, medical, life-saving. For late-term cases, life-threatening conditions, rare health justifications, life-threatening issues, estimates suggest that less than 10% of late-term abortions, approximately 670 to 1,300, involve a maternal health risk. An even smaller subset, likely less than 1 to 2% of late-term abortions, being strictly to save the mother's life or no alternative like delivery is viable. So his statement is completely false. You got like 6,700 late-term abortions being performed a year, and then you have less than 1% of those or to save the mother's life, and he just said all of them. All of them are. It's just not true.
Threatening medical reasons.
Right, but there are exceptions to that, right? There are people that change their mind.
Well, and I think within Roe versus Wade, there was a legal framework for states to be able to make decisions about how you regulate abortion. Mm-hmm. And so if a state decides that they wanted to ban elective late-term abortions, if those things happen, then that was completely fine within the framework of Roe versus Wade. But we're not having that conversation.
So, I mean, this interview was only kind of remarkable because he makes some like bonkers biblical claims. Like, I've never heard the claim that Mary had to give consent to have Jesus. Like, that one was totally nuts. And we debunked it immediately. Just went right to his source. Absolutely nonsense. He made the claim that there's no historical precedent that you have to be anti-abortion if you're a Christian. First century Christians believed it. Written down in the Didache, known forever. Catholic Church has been anti-abortion since forever. So I don't know where he's getting that. That's crazy. And then, he said a bunch of things that are just like not false, or that are not true, that are false about abortions. And like that just seems to be the common position of Democrats and pro-choice people. There's like, they have to use like soft language. Oh, we're going to talk about like abortions, and we're talking about compassion for the mother and bodily autonomy and blah, blah, blah. And they have to use a lot of like lies to get their point across. And again, just because a majority of people believe it doesn't mean it's right. It's a logical fallacy. Sorry. So, interesting interview. I can see why my buddy sent it to me. Scouts out.